Good afternoon, this is Force 13 Live. It's just reached midday on the US East Coast and we are continuing to track Hurricane Dorian, which continues to get stronger at this time. Gradual consolidation over the last few hours and a steadily increasing intensity. We're running, and so the National Hurricane Center are running with 150 miles per hour winds. That's 240 kilometers per hour, 10 miles an hour away from Category 5 intensity. So we're agreeing on numbers right now in terms of wind speed. Their pressure reading is slightly higher than ours, 945 they're running with at the update. Maybe surprising to some people that they haven't issued any further warnings today. And what is even more surprising is what happened overnight. If you're just catching up, the models have had a dramatic shift towards the east. And at this point, no major model is predicting a hurricane landfall in Florida. However, that does still mean that the storm is just off the coast and could deliver, probably still will, deliver hurricane force winds to large parts of the eastern coast of Florida. I think we're going to hear a lot of Matthew comparisons in this hour. We've got a live discussion here for this hour on our live stream. My name's Nathan Foy. I'm joined by Orlando, Sam, and Thomas. How are you guys today?
I'm doing well.
So we've been watching, I've certainly been watching very closely since 9 o'clock this morning when we did our last update on the storm. Its presentation is increasing in structure again. It's looking much better. The eye is getting warmer still. We've had some satellite outages, so we've had to flop about with some more imagery. But we do have some here. This is quite up to date. The last image from this is about 6 minutes old, and the eye is clearly getting warmer in those frames. The cloud tops around it are in and out, but they're coming back in at the moment. So I think good value for 150 miles an hour, and I think, Thomas, you have some strong views on this too.
Yeah, I think that Dorian is an exceptionally strong storm, and I think that it's caught a lot of people by surprise with just how strong it has gotten. I personally think there were some recon readings that showed SFMR wind speeds extrapolated to the surface of around 160. I personally think it's a little conservative to go with 150. I think 155 is more appropriate, but regardless of which way you lean on that scale, it's still very dangerous. And I personally think, especially for places such as the Bahamas, rainfall is probably going to be one of the biggest threats for them.
The National Hurricane Center cone has shifted well to the east since yesterday, still calling for a landfall on the Bahamas. The northernmost islands could be an extremely powerful storm when it moves through there. And what we're also noting is that it's slowing down as it gets there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's slowing down quite a bit as a result of really the competing steering influences over Dorian. As Dorian gets stronger, the steering influences become much more important, especially at the upper levels. The lower levels don't have as much influence anymore. And so the stronger it gets, the more that upper level high is going to really slow it down. So if this were to get to Category 5 intensity, this thing could be hovering over the Bahamas for 24 to 36 hours, which would be catastrophic for them.
Absolutely.
That would be very bad news.
There's the wind speed probability field, and you can see parts of even North Carolina now getting 40%, even 50% on the extreme southern tip now of tropical storm force wind probabilities. Could someone please explain to us what exactly has happened overnight with those models and just how dramatically they've shifted?
Well, right now it seems as though for the very moment that since last night most of the models have shifted obviously to the east. There still seems to be high levels of uncertainty as most of the models aren't even consolidated, even with the more eastern shift at the moment. Beyond that, the main explanation for this is likely the possibility of the storm slowing down to a crawl or even stalling has become an increasing possibility, leading to a high level of uncertainty moving forward.
That's what we hate. We totally hate storms that stall.
Yeah, especially because it leads to a huge level of uncertainty where it's going to go, if it's going to make landfall, is it not going to make landfall, who's going to get the most impacts, who's not. And it really makes it tricky for everyone, even more so for the people in harm's way. Beyond that, it's going to be very interesting to watch for the next couple of days how the models play out and how the storm plays out.
Now we're looking at some models there, and the general consensus is that it will peak within the next 24 hours. Do we all agree with that?
I agree with it. I personally think it'll peak right around 24 hours. I know a lot of people on the project think it'll peak around the 12-hour time frame from now. I think it's got until about 24 hours to continue intensification before gradual weakening trend is going to begin as steering does produce shear and
Right.
it does get shift north.
So you're saying that the whole reason for it gradually weakening will be wind shear.
Yes.
And wind shear values at the moment are up around the 10 knot range, which is fairly low, and it might creep above around 15 perhaps. But when it does start weakening, it's only going to be a very gradual trend until it starts meeting some land areas somewhere, really. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to be interesting to watch, especially with the uncertainty in the forecast that still remains to be a thing.
This is the latest rainfall chart as well for the next 7 days, and you can just see how drastically Florida has reduced its forecasted rainfall totals across much of the western part of the state. Only the far eastern coast, West Palm Beach northward, really is expecting 6 inches of rain now. Orlando maybe 4 inches according to this forecast graphic, but you can quite clearly see where the epicenter is in terms of the rainfall predictions. 20 plus inches possibly for the Bahamas, those northernmost islands. And then a secondary threat which we might be looking to see now, some models agreeing on a South Carolina landfall, 1 or 2 for a North Carolina landfall, and 1 or 2 models not calling for any US landfall at all. We'd be thrilled if that's the case, but I would put a lot of caution into that because there is still a more than decent chance that the storm is going to severely impact some parts of the US. All 4 of those states, Florida through North Carolina, should watch very closely, and all 4 of them could be severely impacted by this storm still.
Yeah, especially North and South Carolina since they are still in some way recovering from Hurricane Florence almost exactly a year ago.
Indeed it was, and Florence a completely different kind of storm track than the one that we're seeing with Dorian. But again, there is the rainfall estimate, 6 inches all the way up to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, according to that estimate, and maybe 10 plus for parts of South Carolina. Let's just spend a moment pointing out what else is going on around the world. National Hurricane Center have 2 other areas of interest in the Atlantic. A disturbance near the Cape Verde Islands off the African coast, 20% chance in the next 48 hours. And were you guys saying 60% next 5 days?
Yeah.
I think that's what I heard quoted. And the other disturbance, 10% in the next 48 hours.
Yeah.
And that's 20% in the next 5 days as well.
I think something worth noting, especially approaching the afternoon hours on the eastern seaboard, is what's going to happen with the next ECMWF model run, because the last one that happened, I believe it was the 6Z run, basically made the storm slow down even further near the Bahamas and take a more west to southwestern dip, which would be interesting to see if that will persist, if there will be a more western shift within the models. But right now, everything still remains on the cards.
Eastern Pacific interests as well. We should point this one out. 60% chance of development of this system in the Eastern Pacific. Probably going to become a tropical cyclone, thankfully, moving out to sea. And over in the Western Pacific, there's 3 invests that could form there at this point. Now that we've got them out of the way, let's go back to Dorian and the latest GOES 16 imagery, unless you had a word about them.
The invest in the Eastern Pacific has a 90% chance of development now in the next 5 days, 60% in 2.
Yeah.
So
that one's pretty likely to form. Dorian with winds of 150 miles an hour. Let's reiterate some of the warning and hazard information for you at this point. So the warnings are the same as they were yesterday. A hurricane warning is in effect for the northwestern Bahamas, excluding Andros Island, because Andros Island has a hurricane watch instead. A hurricane warning means that hurricane conditions are expected somewhere within the warning area. Preparation to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. Interest in southern and central Florida should continue to monitor the progress of Dorian. Watches may be required for portions of the east coast of Florida later today. Do you think they'll do that? They've got to, really, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, it's likely that they're going to issue. They're gonna start issuing watches, even with the model consensus starting to take it away from Florida. But yeah, I wouldn't even with its track. I think that would be I think that would definitely be a very good idea, because the unpredictability of the storm has really shot up in the last 48 hours.
Totally. The hazards here: hurricane conditions expected in the hurricane warning area across the northwestern Bahamas by Sunday, with tropical storm force winds beginning tonight. A life-threatening storm surge will raise water levels by as much as 10 to 15 feet above normal tide levels in areas of onshore winds in northwestern Bahamas. Near the coast, the surge will be accompanied by large and destructive waves. Dorian is expected to produce the following rainfall accumulations this weekend into the middle of next week. The northwestern Bahamas, 10 to 15 inches, isolated 25 now, they're saying. Coastal sections of the southeast United States, 4 to 8 inches, isolated 12. Central Bahamas, 2 to 4 inches, isolated up to 6. And of course, swells will begin to affect the east-facing shores of the Bahamas, the Florida east coast, and the southeastern United States coast during the next few days. These swells are likely to cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. Please consult products from your local weather office. The next National Hurricane Center update is an intermediate advisory at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by a full advisory at 5 p.m. And that's the point where we'll be back live streaming later on today. Back to the storm right now, and the floor's open for any of our contributors right now.
So Dorian, like has been said before, is very impressive. On my screen, I actually have some satellite imagery, and you can see how impressive it is symmetry-wise. You can see the CDO, you can see a lot of clouds over on its eastern side. But when it comes to the higher cloud tops and it comes to the general structure, you can see it's very symmetric as this pushes westward. There's a little bit of shear going on it right now, and you can see that by some clouds in the upper levels moving this way and some in the lower levels moving the other. So we can see clearly some shear, and these are from what's probably going to be those competing steering currents that'll be pushing in almost exact opposite directions on Dorian relatively shortly, and that's why it's going to slow down so much. And that's going to be definitely interesting to see. As a result of what's going on now with Dorian and what's going to be going on, we can see the track forecast has changed substantially.
We've got to watch that movement extremely closely, because if it we're looking for those signs that it's slowing down. It already has slowed down from 10 miles per hour last night to 8. And if that continues, if we start seeing 4, 3, then it's really starting to stall. So we're looking out for the storm to really slow down to below 5 miles per hour.
And something else to consider as well is that all of these models have a northward jog to the storm as it goes north before going out to sea. So if Dorian were to take a wobble south even slightly, that could substantially impact where it's going to go. Just a small wobble southward, farther southward than expected, and we could be right back to something very similar to what we were seeing before. So even these little wobbles that we're seeing right now are kind of crucial. And on the infrared loop, you
If
can
I'm not
see it just
mistaken,
wobbling.
a little
north.
wobble west there, yeah?
Yeah. You can just see it wobbling back and forth and back and forth.
It's right now, I believe it's over 26 degrees north, and it's like wobbling around that area. But it's generally the movement is 20, and depending how far it gets west, it'll and even as mentioned before, might take a wobble to the south. That will definitely impact the storm's future and its track.
South Carolina has just declared a state of emergency as a result of Dorian.
So how many states is that now?
I know Florida's done it. Did Georgia do it? I would assume they did. If not, they're probably going to.
Yeah.
I think there'll be states of
At
emergency.
least for the coastal counties and a few inland from there, I would say.
Yeah.
It really depends on its track.
So again, we're mesmerised just as everyone else is by the imagery of the storm, and I must say it has moved westward for the last 30 minutes, which might not mean very much in the short term, but it could mean more in the long term. Maybe we'll see what happens next. If you've got any comments or questions for us this hour, please send us a message live on our stream, streaming on YouTube right now, and you can put a comment in the chat section. Start your message with Force 13. It will light up big and bright for us, and we can hopefully address it. Can't guarantee we'll get to every question today because there has been such a demand for information for the storm, but we'll do our very best. Let's see if we have any so far. Could the storm make landfall in North Carolina as a major hurricane? It has happened before, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Too early to tell.
Yeah.
Oh, we're also joined by Devon at this point. That was the unfamiliar voice there. And I think Strat's
Well,
also
Strat.
here too.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I am.
Welcome to you both as well. Briefly, either of you thoughts on Dorian today?
Oh, we got a couple of suspect SFMR readings of Category 5 intensity, but NHC, like with us, seems to think that they are erroneous in fashion. So we're currently going, I believe, with 150.
Yeah.
150. Okay.
Here's a question. Any reason why the pressure is higher than what we normally see in 150 mile an hour cyclone? Florence last year had the same winds, yet the pressure was almost 10 millibars lower.
Well, look at the size of the storm. It's absolutely tiny. I mean, tiny storms don't need a very low pressure to achieve high wind speeds.
I mean, we know it's
If
small,
they're-
but it's actually quite difficult to assess, really, when you look at this very up-close imagery. It can be quite misleading.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we can tell you that the storm is rather small. Let's just see if we can get the geocolor on the screen as well. It's a bit more zoomed out. Looks a lot smaller on this imagery, and that's because it is.
Yeah, the storm is a really tiny one. With this storm, it's a little bit larger than Andrew at this point. And Andrew, if you remember, 175,922. So this storm would be pretty much in the same kind of pressure situation.
All right. I'm not sure what that question actually is. Does the decrease in directional speed, stalling, and... Okay, I'm trying to get through this question. Will it increase the strength? Does it mean, basically, that Category 5 is more likely if it starts stalling? It's a question that we get.
I would think that would make it less likely because the slower the storm moves, the more the chance the upwelling of cold waters is going to affect it. I mean, it would have to slow down to like 3 miles an hour or slower in order for that to happen. It'll need to stay over the same place for about 24 hours, which currently in forecast is pretty much asking for that right now. So that would obviously cause weakening in the storm if it doesn't have the sea surface temperatures to pull up.
How likely would we say at this point that there's going to be a Florida landfall, considering that all the models have moved way out towards the east and hardly any, if any, actually call for a landfall anymore, but they are still calling for hurricane-force winds?
I give it a solid 1 in 3 at this point.
I would give it just less than half chance, like maybe about 40 between 40 and 45% chance of a landfall.
Because the models with this uncertainty could just as easily start to shift back west again. The 12Z GFS is pretty interesting because it
That's
shows
the
a
point
bit
that
of
we've
a,
been making on our updates too.
because the GFS, the 12Z run shows a bit of weakness in the trough that it wants to use to pull it out to sea once you get a bit more into the long range. So if you see that trend continue to develop, you could kind of see it the tracks in general start to try to push a bit more westward again.
So we continue to look at the storm on this imagery, and still looks like there's some blow-ups going on the northwestern side. It is looking more and more like a donut as we go through time today, though.
Yeah, its appearance is very impressive.
You remember at the very end of last night's stream, as we were finishing up at 11 o'clock, the western eye wall looked like it was just barely hanging on. It's looking so much better today all round, isn't it?
Yeah, and it still hasn't gone under any type of eye wall replacement cycle either.
Yeah, it's very disheartening. As the live discussion ended last night, I was thinking we could potentially start to see somewhat of a positive trend for potential weakening, and then a few hours later, before rest starts the night, we just see the complete opposite happen. This thing kind of just blows back up again to be just as strong as it was before. And it looks like there's even new development on the western side of the eye wall right now of new convection, if you're looking at that imagery that you're showing as well. So in terms of prospects, especially for the Bahamas right now, where impacts are most certain, very disheartening and dangerous for those particular areas in the northern Bahamas that will almost certainly be impacted by the storm at this point in time.
Even since the NHC update came, the storm, at least in my opinion, is its appearance has gotten even better. The eye itself is a lot less ragged than it was just a few hours ago, and I think that the western side is a lot more robust at this point than it was just a little bit ago, cloud tops wise.
Yeah, this is again something, and we were watching it all night last night too. It just changing and evolving all the time. Wise not to make knee-jerk reactions, but this is a trend that has been going on for some time, and I did think that once it got to Category 4 status, it would be doing a very gradual intensification. It's still ramping up slowly but surely right now. We don't often see that.
What would you say are the chances right now of it passing the 157 mile an hour threshold?
In other words, Category 5.
It says 35% at the bottom of the screen when it comes by.
We are going with 35% at the moment on our feed, indeed. And
35%.
Would you agree with that number?
What number, I'm sorry?
35% chance for Category 5 we're running with.
I think it's higher than that.
I'd take it slightly higher. I'd give it towards a 40% chance.
I'm inclined to keep it around where it is right now, just because we'd need to see a significant deepening of convection as well to really kind of push it over the top there. And for someone wondering, it is not a Category 5 right now, just to clear up any confusion in the chat. It's still a Category 4.
Yep.
But we're talking about potential odds that it does reach Category 5. Some people are talking about state of emergencies quickly. I know, just to clarify, North Carolina's declared a state of emergency, so it's just South Carolina just with that. They did it within the past 30 minutes. South Carolina. Florida's been in a state of emergency since yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I think Georgia is too, but I haven't heard that directly in the past 24 hours. So I would presume, considering the neighboring states, that they are. But I can also take a quick look for that just to find out for us as well.
Let me read out some wind speed probabilities now, and they are creeping further north. National Hurricane Center even lists Washington, D.C. now, 3% chance for tropical storm force winds. Ocean City, 6%. Charlottesville, 4%. Richmond, Virginia, 7%. Danville, 10%. Norfolk, 9%. 10 actually. Elizabeth City, 15%. Greensboro, North Carolina, 12%. Raleigh, 18%. Rocky Mount, 19%. Cape Hatteras 29, Fayetteville 31, Charlotte 14, Cherry Point 31, New River 41, Morehead City 43, Surf City 40, Wilmington 43, Bald Head Island 58, Florence 39, South Carolina, Columbia 29, Little River 51, Myrtle Beach 62. 62% chance in South Carolina already for tropical storm force winds. Georgetown 57, Charleston 61. Beaufort 59, Atlanta, Georgia 5, Augusta 25, Savannah 57, Kings Bay 65, Waycross 43, Mayport, Florida 81, Jacksonville 62, Gainesville 46. A lot of these numbers are dropping a little bit. Daytona Beach 78, that one's going up. The Villages 53, Orlando 67, Cocoa Beach 92, Patrick Air Force Base 82, Fort Pierce 92, West Palm Beach 88, Fort Lauderdale 75, Miami now down to 41% chance for tropical storm force winds, Homestead 33, Marathon 25, Key West 17, Naples 27, Fort Myers 30, Venice 27, Tampa 35, Cedar Key 44, Tallahassee 14, St. Mark's 15, and several others along that list too. Grand Bahama obviously 99%, 60% chance of hurricane, and New Providence 77% chance of tropical storm force winds there too. As we are right now, the hurricane watches and warnings are still only in effect for the northwestern Bahamas. Hurricane warning there, excluding Andros Island, who are under a hurricane watch. So still not that many warnings out at the minute, because I suppose a huge amount of uncertainty.
Yeah, the amount of uncertainty and the lowering of forecast confidence has been astonishingly high over the past 24 hours or so. I think 24 hours ago, most of us would have been saying that a Florida landfall was nearly a certainty.
2 days ago, every major model agreed on a Florida landfall 4 days out, which hadn't ever happened before. Never had the models been so sure. And now every major model is not calling for a Florida landfall. I still can't quite get over that myself.
It's quite spectacular, to say the least. And just the thing with the warnings and watches, one of the reasons we aren't seeing them for mainland United States is the regulations for time frame. It isn't really within the time frame where they're really allowed to issue certain warnings, like hurricane watches at this point in time yet.
Devon, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to come in and say that during Dorian's entire lifetime, really, the models have been very tightly bound together. They've been very close to each other. They've always been in good agreement, but Dorian has not been in agreement with any of the models. It seems the models have been shifting chaotically back and forth here, so it is very important to realize, the models can shift back, and a lot of Florida is still within the National Hurricane Center cone. It's looking better for the storm to not directly impact Florida with major hurricane force winds. We absolutely cannot rule out a Florida landfall at this point.
And you look at that cone there, there's still the provision that the storm center, it can track anywhere within that cone, so that includes Lake Okeechobee still. It could just about move over, or it could move well east. And we just wait for the next model runs, I suppose, to see whether the trend is continuing to shift or whether it moves back. And this is all down to the intensity of a high pressure ridge.
Yeah, and I was looking at the 12Z GFS rendering. Actually is a bit to the west of the current National Hurricane Center cone. It's kind of
Okay.
It's kind of, instead of moving it further north initially, at its turn it gives a more northwest angle towards the Carolina coastline, rather than just due north before it hooked to northeast. That ridge weakness maybe a little less apparent here. And I think once you get to the later mark where the northeast turn could potentially happen, compared to previous runs, the GFS is starting to show a bit of weakness in the trough that might pull it out as well. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that in the future.
Let's check in with that latest imagery again. Here is the storm right now. This is what we've been looking at all day, all night last night. And we just watch for every new frame, really, as everyone else is. And more black areas increasing on the western side of the storm's eye wall. It really is looking better with those cloud top temperatures, and it's gradually building. 150 miles an hour is definitely fair, and maybe there is an increasing case for the storm to go up another notch. Depends what that eye temperature is, and unfortunately I don't have the tools on this one to actually tell you, because that could be quite important in figuring out how strong the storm is along with those cloud tops, certainly when we're doing our satellite observation techniques. Yesterday the eye temperature peaked at 20 degrees Celsius, which is very warm for an Atlantic eye temperature, warmer than other such storms such as Irma and Maria, but the cloud tops weren't anywhere near as good as those two storms, so in reality it didn't count for as much, and it was weaker than obviously Irma and Maria being category 5s. But the case is starting to grow for it. Not to say that it is anywhere near a category 5 just yet, but it could still be on the way in the next 12 to 24 hours. That's the storm's chance before it slows down too much.
Well, what reason would it have not to? An eye wall replacement cycle doesn't look like it's really coming in.
Eye wall replacement cycles and incoming northerly shear and forward movement. Which, if
northerly shear is low for now. That'll increase with time.
Which, if you take a look at the latest frames, it does look like that the eye is degrading in structure a little bit.
Yeah, some of the imagery that I see is a bit outdated right now, because there looks like to be some delays happening as well.
The mesoscale imagery is out of date, but the larger scale imageries are still working and up to date, and I can tell you the latest eye temperature as of 6 minutes ago is 17 degrees Celsius, so it's been pretty constant all day since last night.
Which is still really not good news to hear at all, that the fact that it's actually maintaining its eye temperature.
With those bigger cloud tops now, that would be a slight increase in intensity. I don't know what our satellite technique is saying at the moment, but it was saying 145 miles an hour this morning, and it looks better than that now.
I'm questioning, is that imagery on the screen right now the most up to date, just because some of the other ones I've been seeing have been running a bit delayed?
This is as of 8 minutes ago, the last image on this.
Okay, so that eye isn't as wobbly, unfortunately, as I thought it might look like. Some of the imagery from a couple hours ago on the 1 minute scales were definitely looking a bit more wobbly than what the live imagery that you're showing is.
And it looked a lot more ragged. At least to me, the eye looks a lot better now than it did a couple hours ago.
Yeah. Someone asked a good question that you guys could probably answer. Why hasn't there been an eye wall replacement cycle yet?
They're extremely difficult to predict. It entirely depends on when the storm builds a second concentric eye wall. We really don't know what causes a storm to cycle through eye walls. So it's really difficult for us to try to figure that information out. It's pretty much a wild card. It's one of the big unknowns when it comes to tropical meteorology. They're notoriously difficult to forecast. mainly because, like I said, we don't really know why the storms do it. We just know that they do.
Sometimes you can tell a little bit beforehand if the eye is shrinking, but it's not doing that at the moment. And it's not necessarily a giveaway. Sometimes the eye can shrink like it did last night and survive, which it looked like it was really surviving for a while. But it got over that, and it's now looking much better today.
Right, but not only that, he's asking why has it not undergone an eye replacement. So it's like that's not necessarily a question that I don't really think that anybody could really answer that. Not even the experts have been working on this for like 20 or 30 years, because we really don't know.
Let's see how far away from land it is at this point. The distance is closing in. Let me just see if I can get... Go ahead, Strat.
And while you do that, I'd just like to point out to anyone in chat that if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, start your messages Force 13 all in text. It lights up in a nice bright orange for us to see. Helps us kind of pinpoint what wants to be known most right now. That's how we saw that previous question right there. Someone a quick question that I think we just talked about anyways, but good to reiterate it. What is the chance of a Category 5 right now with the current wind speeds? We're officially going with about 35% chance at this point in time, which is up from 20% last night and way up from 2% 2 nights before.
25 last night, and we might up it to 40 later today. Just want
I think it's higher than that.
I know. You keep saying that. We keep... I'm looking at the distances now. Freeport, 312 miles from the eye right now. The closest point of Great Abaco Island, which is the one that the storm will impact first, 210 miles. Places in Florida, Miami, 408 miles. West Palm Beach, 401. Port St. Lucie, 420. Melbourne, 452. Orlando, 504. Tampa, 560. Daytona Beach, 501. St. Augustine, 539. And Jacksonville, 568. So, still quite far away from those places, given that its wind field is about 120 miles or something to that effect. And given that the storm is likely to slow down, it's anyone's guess, really, when tropical storm force winds will start in Florida. It's very, very uncertain. You know, the initial forecast, we were thinking it would be happening now, making landfall late this weekend. Now, if it makes landfall, we could be looking late Tuesday, couldn't we?
Yeah.
And just to think of the absurdity of this, 4 days ago, we were assuming that this thing would dissipate and not even pose really a threat to the Bahamas other than some light scattered rain. And now it's a powerful Category 4 storm threatening a good chunk of the Bahamas and lots of the southeast of the United States as well, which is pretty crazy to think of how quickly these scenarios can change, not just from what we've already seen, but then also, you know, how quickly the models are changing back and forth as well right now over the past couple days.
We're looking at water vapor imagery on the screen now as well. That is the most... that's the mid-level water vapor. That's the one that we usually use. So any of those yellowish areas show dry air. Doesn't look like it's going to be threatening the storm anytime soon because the storm's got a capable core that can keep that far away.
Yeah, and there were brief talks of annularity last night. We'd just like to point out that has not really happened. Just for us to kind of clarify that out. You know, you can tell with the eastern side in particular.
Yep, much larger.
There is a couple of questions being asked. What program are we seeing, or like what website are we using? If you just want to go over that, because I think you're pretty proud of this. Am
I? Which one?
How we're broadcasting this. A couple of people are asking what website or program we're using.
All kinds of things. The automated streaming service is running on the Force 13 website. The imagery is from the College of DuPage. The water vapor imagery that we're looking at the moment. From GOES 16. There are plenty of satellite sources, but just a note right now, mesoscale imagery is not up to date, but regional imagery, and of course full disk imagery is up to date. It's just that the imagery isn't as often. We're looking at 5-minute imagery rather than 1-minute imagery that we were looking at last night, so the animation isn't quite as fluid, but you can still quite clearly see what's going on.
Yeah, and just an update, recon passed through the center right now, dictates a pressure at flight level with about 34 knot winds of 944.1 millibars at this point in time. And there are some SFMR readings that are not suspected of 140 knots at this point in time.
Yeah, it's literally coupled with a suspect SFMR, so I would definitely not go with
there's
that.
one non-suspect and 2 suspect directly after it. So it's not really confirmable.
They're literally
Okay.
coupled with each other, so... if you do take a look at it, though, the flight level winds do seem to support that 130, as it looks like a 134 knot SFMR. So I think we might be looking at a 155 mile an hour system right now.
That wouldn't be a surprise looking at it. Here's the visible imagery. This is what often impresses people the most, even though it's not necessarily, well, certainly isn't the best way to estimate intensity, but Devon, what kind of things can we tell? What is visible helpful for when we're looking at the storm?
If you're trying to determine strength from visible, it's not very helpful at all. What visible imagery is good for is taking a look at it and realizing... I personally like the visible because I think it is the prettiest. I think it gives a good visible representation of, like, what if you were looking from space, what would you end up seeing? And this is what you would end up seeing. This is what the storm looks like from space. And I think that's pretty, but in actual practical use for visible imagery, there really isn't any, mainly because, of course, with infrared, you're not going to see a lot of the high-level cirrus clouds because the infrared kind of takes that out of consideration. And with the visible, you are able to see the outflow of the storm a lot more than an infrared imagery would you be able to see that. So,
although I suppose with some kinds of weak, very weak storms, it can help in pinpointing the center of the storm too.
oh yeah. If the storm center is decoupled from the convection, which happened with whatever you want to call the other storm it was not. But anyways, whatever you want to call that thing, we'll just call it a storm that happened and it existed. Yeah, so we had Aaron that got decoupled, and it was just really poor.
It was bad.
Do we think this could be an Andrew situation is a question that we get.
Nope.
Near nil at this point in time, unless something wholly unexpected were to happen. Although a bit of note that I was kind of seeing in our Discord chat room earlier, some people were trying to show that some of the European ensemble runs are trying to show a bit of a southwestward kink in the Bahamas. So monitoring that for potential impacts to Florida is going to be vital in the coming hours.
It's still really difficult to tell what the exact impacts of Florida are going to be. We're likely still probably another 2 days out from figuring out what those are going to be, which I know is not exactly helpful in determining storm preparations. It's honest, but it's not exactly helpful for, obviously people want a yes or no answer, and that's really difficult to tell for anything larger than 48 hours out, and especially with the storm that's running into zero steering currents. So basically right now, what is going to need to go on here, some key takeaways of what's going on here, is that
very fast.
a large portion of the east coast of Florida still has a significant chance of receiving hurricane force winds from this storm. So people on the east coast of Florida, as basically from Miami northward, do need to prepare for having hurricane force winds for an extended period of time with this storm. Further north from that, going towards Georgia and the Carolinas, those in Georgia, I believe, would absolutely need to prepare for tropical storm force winds. Hurricane force winds, I'm unsure of because it needs to take a very, very weird angle to hit the Georgia coast, and the radius of maximum winds in this storm is quite small. So I would make sure to be prepared for it, but it does seem rather unlikely at this point. For areas further north into South and North Carolina, it is imperative to also make sure that you're ready for hurricane conditions. It's now a great time to start getting your emergency kits together if you have not gotten them done yet. And also, of course, if you're in any of these areas affected by the hurricane or about to be affected by the hurricane, make sure you're heeding any kind of local advisories by the authority and emergency management personnel. You know, they have an extremely difficult job to determine who needs to evacuate, who needs to not evacuate. So make sure you're listening to them. They have an extremely difficult job. They know what they're doing. They know what they're telling you.
Oh dear, the storm didn't fit on the screen there.
Yeah, Devin is exactly right. And the whole thing with the toolkit, I posted a couple links, kind of spamming a little bit of the government's hurricane toolkit website. I'll probably post that again in just a second. But if you're potentially in harm's way in any of the southeastern states right now, you should definitely take a read at that and make sure that you are prepared for any circumstance, because the track of this system is still extremely uncertain. And we're ranging from a potential landfall from Florida to the Carolinas to staying just offshore to who knows what, really. So if you're in any potential threat, you definitely need to be paying very close attention and have emergency prep kits ready and plans in case the storm heads your way directly.
Again, with that latest imagery, another blow-up of convection wrapping around what is the southern side of the eye. Could you just clarify again the latest recon information? What's going on with them right now?
Yes, just bear with me one moment so I can go ahead and scroll up. Push to talk is a thing. I can't scroll and talk at the same time. But anyways, taking a look at the chart here, we have a recon pass getting 3 SFMR readings of very high category 4, low end category 5 reading. We have a reading of 134, along with 2 readings of 140, both of those readings of which are suspect due to high rain rates. The 135 reading seems to be unflagged, and the flight level winds definitely do appear to be strong enough to support 135 miles an hour. The information from the drops, it does seem that way. Information from the drop zone has not been delivered yet, so I am waiting for that to see if the pressure has gone down any.
That will be quite key as well, I'm sure. Thomas, anything you'd like to add? Is he there right now?
I'm not sure, but I would like to add in. Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
My deepest of apologies. Yeah, I think that 155 can be supported with this definitely now. I think 160 is still too aggressive, especially with those flagged SFMR readings. Still, the storm is slowly strengthening, and I think a slow strengthening trend is what's going to continue here over the next 12 to 24 hours.
Latest eye temperature as of 6 minutes ago, still 16 degrees.
And I would just like to point out again, because there are some people talking about in the chat, that South Carolina is definitely in the line of fire. Some people were saying, it may not be. Some people were saying they were from there and were wondering. South Carolina did just declare a state of emergency within the past hour. If you're in any areas that are under a state of emergency, you should listen to all orders from local officials and monitor the storm very closely, because some models do show a South Carolina landfall at this point in time, and with the cone of uncertainty, that is still actually a possibility. And
I
ju-
mean,
it just no,
go ahead, Strat.
I was going to say, just even if it doesn't make landfall in South Carolina, it doesn't mean adverse impacts can't occur regardless. Even though it's smaller compared to other storms, Dorian, it's still, compared to, let's say, a squall line, for example, absolutely massive. So this thing could still be over 100 miles offshore and still bring significant impacts to coastal areas.
Another thing that needs to be noted, of course, is that just like with Hurricane Matthew, there were significant storm surges that came ashore in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. I would expect to prepare for similar types of storm surges. This storm is going to be stronger, but smaller. So they should roughly cancel out, and they should have roughly a similar type storm surge. So if you remember what the surge values were during Matthew, I would probably expect something similar here from Dorian.
Fascinating. We're going to be finishing up shortly here with our discussion hour. There's plenty more updates coming up later this evening. Our main part of the discussion will be beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, and we'll be here for an extended period to talk about the latest. There again is the latest National Hurricane Center forecast cone, calling for major hurricane all the way up until Wednesday. I'm trying to think back, when was the last time we had a major hurricane, say, just off the coast of South Carolina there? Because Matthew wasn't one by that point, was it?
No, I mean, you could say Florence, but it weakened.
Well,
it wouldn't be Florence either. I would imagine you have to go
because they
back.
both weakened.
I would imagine you have to go back to Hugo.
how strong was Fran, though?
Oh. Yeah, Fran did. But that was further north than that. That was way further north.
Yeah, I suppose.
If you want to talk about, that specific location, Fran was way further north and east and went into North Carolina. And that location in South Carolina, I mean, this is even further south and west than Hugo was.
Yes, indeed, very true.
Yeah, and the whole track we just have seen the storm take is, its own journey itself, and how peculiar it's been from forming in the main development region to crossing through the Lesser Antilles to that vital and extremely important center relocation that allowed it to, instead of make landfall in Hispaniola, shift and go east of Puerto Rico to its westward curve to where it is right now, to where it's coming into a westward angle and could turn to the north and kind of drag the coastline a bit. It's peculiar and intriguing, to say the least, and to see how this track further evolves is going to be extremely important as well, especially since some of the 12Z runs from the parent models have showed a bit of a kink westward in some of the latest forecasts.
There's one thing I should also mention to everyone as well, and we should discuss this before we finish up, is the scope of the possibility of the wind field really growing as it moves further north. Who'd like to add some commentary on that?
Okay, so that is going to end up being what happens once the storm ends up weakening. And this happens with pretty much every single tropical storm, is once it ends up losing a lot of its intensity, it tends to expand its wind field by quite a bit. So two things are going to make this storm expand its wind field: stalling and moving further northward. So you will see the storm grow in size. I don't think it's going to double in size, but it can grow in size once it starts weakening and moving northward. Obviously, as the storm gets larger in radius, that's an even greater storm surge threat. So, again, that's why I try to say, even if this thing doesn't come ashore, you're still going to get the tropical storm force winds. Hurricane force gusts, also pretty likely. Hurricane force sustained winds, that we'll have to have, we'll have more info on that in the future. But that is seeming like a smaller and smaller likelihood every single day. But storm surge, tropical storm force winds sustained, hurricane force wind gusts, they all seem still very likely with this thing.
definitely. And again, you look at it, and you're sort of talking from maybe West Palm Beach northwards, still with a chance of hurricane force winds when you look at that graphic.
Yep, absolutely. That's what I would say.
Miami currently with a 41% chance of tropical storm force winds. Do you think they'll get them?
I think that they will. I would imagine that they would at least get tropical storm force gusts out of this storm. I don't see why they wouldn't. I mean, it's going to be right there.
I mean, no matter what, there is definitely going to be adverse impacts among the large majority of the eastern coast of Florida at minimum, is what we can say, at least for the continental United States. What we can't say for certainty for direct impacts is that the northern Bahamas are going to get absolutely battered by extremely powerful storm. That's where the CDPS is located right now, if I'm not mistaken, for our projections. But that's stalling there. I'm pretty sure some of the models are showing over 20 inches of rainfall, along with the potential storm surge and hurricane force winds as well. So a very dangerous situation for the Bahamas as well. And then later down the line, that's when we start focusing on adverse impacts on the eastern coast of the United States as well.
Yeah, CDPS stage 5 for South Carolina at the moment, and I think for the Bahamas, if it was to make landfall, I think it's still a stage 6 or maybe 7, Devon, I think.
6 or 7, depending on how much rain actually ends up falling. I would still project a 7 on this because of just how slow it's going to be moving. 20 to 25 inches of rain expected. I mean, it seems for the course to me.
All right, yeah, so there it is, and I guess that is pretty much everything on this discussion hour. Would anyone like to just raise anything before we finish up here?
I'd just like to mention quickly for those that are watching now that are going to be watching the automated streaming service and potentially the discussion later today, that although we provide the best coverage that we can for your specific area, always make sure to listen to your local officials, especially if you're in the northern Bahamas or the southeastern United States right now. If you're given orders by your local officials, follow them. If it's a voluntary evacuation order, strongly consider it. If it's an involuntary one, do not just consider it, go. Make sure you have your hurricane prep kit ready. I've been posting the link a few times in the chat. I'll post it again momentarily. Make sure to stay in touch with friends and family that are in harm's way. Make sure that they're safe as well. And for yourself, make sure you're safe as well and listening and keeping up to date on the latest information of the storm.
You can watch back this hour of live coverage on our YouTube channel when it gets uploaded shortly. We'll be doing another video update, a short video update on the Force 13 channel at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will be shared on our live stream as soon as it gets uploaded as well. After that, at 5 p.m, we're going to be back with more live discussion on the storm. In the meantime, we're going to leave you back with the automated graphics and the up-to-date imagery on the screen. I was watching it for most of the night last night, and we'll leave you with that now. We'll be back again soon. Stay tuned for more, and make sure those preparations get done ahead of this storm. It could still be a massive threat for all of these states involved.